just by redefining his terms. It's nothing but wordplay. At the end of the day, Dr. Harris isn't really talking about moral values at all. He's just talking about what's conducive to the flourishing of sentient life on this planet. Then we do not have a sound foundation for objective moral values and duties. Now notice that these are conditional claims. I shall not be arguing tonight that God exists. Maybe Dr. Harris is right, that atheism is true.
On Dr. Craig's view, most of these people, many of these people certainly, will be going to hell because they're praying to the wrong God. Just think about that. Okay, through no fault of their own, they were born into the wrong culture where they got the wrong theology and they missed the revelation.
Welcome to the second installment of the God Debate. My name is Michael Ray. I'm a professor of philosophy here at the University of Notre Dame and the director of the Center for Philosophy of Religion, one of the sponsors of tonight's event. The Center for Philosophy of Religion was founded in the late 1970s with the aim of promoting cutting-edge research on topics in the philosophy of religion and in distinctively Christian philosophy. One of our goals in sponsoring the God Debate series is to try to bring some of the very issues discussed among our research fellows to a wider, non-academic audience and in a format that will hopefully be fun and engaging. Our show tonight, as you already know, is a debate between William Lane Craig and Sam Harris, coming together for the very first time to discuss the question, are the foundations of moral values natural or supernatural? William Lane Craig is research professor of philosophy at Talbot School of Theology in La Mirada, California. He is best known among philosophers for his extensive and influential work in the philosophy of time and the philosophy of religion. He is known to the wider public as someone who is able to articulate and defend the doctrines of the Christian faith in a way that is highly accessible, but also philosophically and theologically rigorous. He became a Christian at the age of 16, pursued undergraduate studies at Wheaton College, and holds 2 earned doctorates, one in philosophy from the University of Birmingham and one in theology from the University of Munich. He has authored or edited over 30 books, as well as over 100 articles in professional journals of philosophy and theology. Known as one of the 4 horsemen of the new atheist movement, Sam Harris is the author of the New York Times bestsellers The Moral Landscape, The End of Faith, and Letter to a Christian Nation. The End of Faith won the 2005 PEN Award for Nonfiction. Mr. Harris's writing has been published in over 15 languages. He and his work have been discussed in Newsweek, Time, the New York Times, Scientific American, Nature, Rolling Stone, and many other journals. His writing has appeared in Newsweek, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Economist, the Times London, the Boston Globe, the Atlantic, the Annals of Neurology, and elsewhere. Mr. Harris is a co-founder and CEO of Project Reason, a nonprofit foundation devoted to spreading scientific knowledge and secular values in society. He received a degree in philosophy from Stanford University and a PhD in neuroscience from UCLA. The structure of tonight's debate will be as follows. Each debater will take 20 minutes for his opening speech, followed by rebuttals of 12 minutes and 8 minutes respectively, and then closing speeches of 5 minutes each. At the conclusion of the debate, we will have about 30 minutes for questions from the audience. If you would like to ask a question, line up behind one of the 2 microphones in front or in the balcony. We're letting Notre Dame students ask the first 4 questions tonight, so if you are not a Notre Dame student and somehow find yourself at the front of the Q&A line, please allow a student to go ahead of you. Time will be kept strictly. There is a timekeeper in the front who can be seen by both speakers, and once each speaker's time has elapsed, he will be given at most 15 seconds to finish his final sentence before being rudely interrupted by me, the time enforcer. Because we are keeping the time strict, we ask you to hold all applause and other indications of agreement or disagreement, cheering, crowd surfing, and the like, until the very end of the debate. Please remember that flash photography, videotaping, and active cell phones are all prohibited. Finally, remember that Notre Dame is the world's #1 institution in the philosophy of religion and also has one of the world's best theology departments. Any questions you don't get to ask during the 25 or 30-minute Q&A, you can ask of your local faculty in the days and weeks to come. And now on with the show.
Well, good evening. It's wonderful to be here at the University of Notre Dame, and I want to begin by
Sorry. We're going to begin each speech with me checking with the timekeeper to make sure that he's ready, and then the timekeeper is going to hit go, and then you get to go.
All right.
So you go when I say begin.
Sorry for jumping the gun.
Professor Craig gets the first word in the debate. Dr. Harris gets the last word. Timekeeper, are you ready? This is 20 minutes. Begin.
I want to begin by thanking the Center for Philosophy of Religion for the invitation to participate in tonight's debate. The question of the correct foundation of morality is one that is not only of tremendous academic interest, but also one that has enormous practical application for our lives. Now, to begin with an important point of agreement, Dr. Harris and I agree that there are objective moral values and duties. To say that moral values and duties are objective is to say that they are valid and binding independent of human opinion. For example, to say that the Holocaust was objectively evil is to say that it was evil even though the Nazis who carried it out thought that it was good. And it would still have been evil even if the Nazis had won World War II and succeeded in brainwashing or exterminating everyone who disagreed with them so that everybody thought the Holocaust was good. One of the great merits of Dr. Harris's recent book, The Moral Landscape, is his bold affirmation of the objectivity of moral values and duties. He inveighs against what he calls the overeducated, atheistic, moral nihilists and relativists who refuse to condemn as objectively wrong terrible atrocities like the genital mutilation of little girls.
Dr. Craig argues that objective morality needs a divine source, but this claim is flawed. It assumes that without a higher power, morality becomes meaningless, yet history shows otherwise. Societies have established moral codes long before religious doctrines even existed. The Holocaust wasn't evil just because a deity said it was. It was evil because it violated basic human dignity, something grounded in reason, not divine commands. Dr. Craig also overlooks centuries of philosophical work, like that of Aristotle, who defined morality as rooted in human flourishing, not divine will. Morality, in this sense, is dynamic, evolving alongside culture and society. So why, then, do we still rely on outdated religious frameworks to explain modern ethical dilemmas? On the flip side, Dr. Harris's perspective, though appealing, raises a crucial issue. Who decides what constitutes well-being? This concept is subjective and easily manipulated by those in power. Ultimately, morality isn't handed down by gods or defined by science. It's something we create through human experience and collective effort. The real question is, are we ready to embrace the complexity of morality, or are we more comfortable with simple, convenient answers?
Well, first let me say it's an honor to be here at Notre Dame, and I'm very happy to be debating Dr. Craig, the one Christian apologist who seems to have put the fear of God into many of my fellow atheists. I've actually gotten more than a few emails this week that more or less read, "Brother, please don't blow this." So you will be the judge. Now, as many of you know, I've spent a fair amount of time criticizing religion. And one of the perks of this job is that you immediately hear from all the people who think that criticizing religion is a terrible thing to do. And strangely, the reason people rise to the defense of God is not that there's so much evidence that God exists, but that they believe that belief in God is the only intellectual framework for an objective morality. And clearly Dr. Craig is among their number. Now, the sense is that without the conviction that moral truths exist, that words like right and wrong and good and evil actually mean something, humanity will just lose its way. That's the fear, and I actually share that fear. I've come to believe that this concern that many religious people have of the erosion of secular morality is not an entirely empty one. Now, I once spoke at an academic meeting on these themes, and I said, as I will say tonight, that once we understand morality in terms of human well-being, we'll be able to make strong claims about which behaviors and ways of life are good for us and which aren't. And I cited as an example the sadism and misogyny of the Taliban as an example of a worldview that was less than perfectly conducive to human flourishing. And it turns out that to denigrate the Taliban at a scientific meeting is to court controversy. Mm-hmm. And after my remarks, I fell into debate with another invited speaker, and this is more or less exactly how our conversation went. She said, "How could you ever say that forcing women to wear burqas is wrong from the point of view of science?" I said, well, because I think it's pretty clear that right and wrong relate to human well-being, and it's just as clear that forcing half the population to live in cloth bags and beating them or killing them when they try to get out is not a way of maximizing human well-being. And she said, well, that's just your opinion. And I said, okay, well, let's make it even easier. Let's say we found a culture that was literally removing the eyeballs of every third child, okay, at birth. Would you then agree that we had found a culture that was not perfectly maximizing human well-being? And she said, it would depend on why they were doing it. So after my eyebrows returned from the back of my head, I said, okay, well, let's say they're doing it for religious reasons. Let's say they have a scripture which says every third should walk in darkness, or some such nonsense. Okay. And then she said, well, then you could never say that they were wrong. Okay, and so you should know, I was talking to someone who has a deep background in science and philosophy. She's actually since been appointed to the President's Council on Bioethics. She's one of 13 people advising President Obama on all of the ethical implications of advances in medicine and related science and technology. And she had just delivered a perfectly lucid lecture on the moral implications of neuroscience for the courts. And she was especially concerned that we could be subjecting captured terrorists to lie detection neuroimaging technology. And she viewed this as really an unconscionable violation of cognitive liberty. So on the one hand, her moral scruples were very finely calibrated to recoil from the slightest perceived misstep in ethical terms in our war on terror. And yet she was quite willing to forgive some primitive culture its fondness for removing the eyeballs of children in its religious rituals. And she seemed to me quite terrifyingly detached from the very real suffering of millions of women in Afghanistan at this moment. So I see this double standard as a problem. And strangely, this is precisely the erosion of basic common sense that many religious people are worried about. I hope it'll be clear to you at the end of this hour that religion is not an answer to this problem. Okay, belief in God is not only unnecessary for a universal morality, it is itself a source of moral blindness. Now, it's widely believed that there are two quantities in this universe. There are facts on the one hand, and of course science can give us our most rigorous discussion of these. But then there are values, which many people like Dr. Craig think science can't touch. Okay, questions of meaning and morality and what life is good for. Now, of course, everyone thinks that science can help us get what we value, okay, but it can never tell us what we ought to value. Okay, and therefore it cannot, in principle, be applied to the most important questions in human life, questions like how we should raise our children or what constitutes a good life. Now, it's thought, from the point of view of science, and Dr. Craig just gave voice to this opinion, that when we look at the universe, all we see are patterns of events. Just one thing follows another. Okay, and there's no corner of the universe that declares certain of its events to be good or evil or right or wrong. Apart from us, I mean, our minds, we declare certain events to be better than others. But in doing that, it seems that we're merely projecting our own preferences and desires onto a reality that is intrinsically value-free. And where do our notions of right and wrong come from? Well, clearly they've been drummed into us by evolution. They're the product of these apish urges and social emotions. And then they get modulated by culture. You take sexual jealousy, for instance. I mean, this is an attitude that has been bred into us over millions of years. Okay, our ancestors were highly covetous of one another, despite the fact that everyone was covered with hair and had terrible teeth. And this possessiveness now gets enshrined in various cultural institutions like the institution of marriage. Okay, so therefore a statement like it's wrong to cheat on one's spouse, okay, seems a mere summation of these contingencies. It seems like it's an improvisation on the back of biology. It seems that from the point of view of science, it can't really be wrong to cheat on your spouse. Okay, this is just how apes like ourselves worry when we learn to worry with words. Okay, now here is where religious people, like Dr. Craig, begin to get a little queasy, as I think they should. Okay. And many see no alternative but to insert the God of Abraham, an Iron Age God of war, into the clockwork as an invisible arbiter of moral truth. Okay, it is wrong to cheat on your spouse because Yahweh deems that it is so. Okay, which is curious because in other moods, Yahweh is perfectly fond of genocide and slavery and human sacrifice. I must say it's pretty amusing to hear Dr. Craig in his opening remarks say that I'm merely focused on the flourishing of sentient creatures on this planet. Okay, if that's a sin, I'll take it. Okay, one wonders what Dr. Craig is focused on. Now, incidentally, you should not trust Dr. Craig's reading of me. Half the quotes he provided from me, as though I wrote them, were quotes from people I was quoting in my book, and often to different effects. So you'll have to read the book. Now, in claiming that values reduce to the well-being of conscious creatures, as I will, I'm introducing two concepts, consciousness and well-being. Now, let's start with consciousness. This is not an arbitrary starting point. Imagine a universe devoid of the possibility of consciousness. Imagine a universe entirely constituted of rocks. Okay, there's clearly no happiness or suffering in this universe. There's no good or evil. Value judgments don't apply. For changes in the universe to matter, they have to matter, at least potentially, to some conscious system. Okay, what about well-being? Well, the well-being of conscious creatures and the link between that and morality may seem open to doubt, but it shouldn't. Okay, here's the only assumption you have to make. Imagine a universe in which every conscious creature suffers as much as it possibly can for as long as it can. Okay, I call this the worst possible misery for everyone. Okay, the worst possible misery for everyone is bad. Okay, if the word bad applies anywhere, it applies here. Now, if you think the worst possible misery for everyone isn't bad, or maybe it has a silver lining, or maybe there's something worse, I don't know what you're talking about. And what's more, I'm pretty sure you don't know what you're talking about either. What I'm saying is the minimum standard of moral goodness is to avoid the worst possible misery for everyone.
Dr. Harris has a strong point when he challenges the idea that God is the source of all morality. For centuries, religion has tried to position itself as humanity's moral compass. But looking at history, it's clear that this claim is less about ethics and more about control. The idea that without God, society would spiral into chaos and moral decay is nothing more than fear-mongering. It's a narrative meant to make us think that morality is only possible within the framework of religious doctrine. But history proves otherwise. Let's talk about Christianity for a second. For much of history, religion didn't stand for equality, freedom, or human well-being. It stood for submission. Women were told they couldn't speak in church, couldn't lead, couldn't own property, and couldn't challenge the patriarchy, all in the name of biblical morality. And these weren't fringe ideas. They were enshrined in Christian doctrine and practiced by the powerful. The justification for slavery? The same God that supposedly lays out our moral compass. If you think that the God of Abraham is where morality begins, you might be overlooking how that very foundation was used to justify some of the worst atrocities in human history. Dr. Craig's insistence on God's moral law as the ultimate truth misses a key point. This truth has been wielded to justify some pretty terrible things. From slavery to genocide to oppression, religion has often found itself on the wrong side of justice and equality. The Bible itself is riddled with moral contradictions. If God's laws are supposed to be the gold standard, why are they so often used to defend the worst aspects of human nature? The morality we hold dear today, the kind that promotes human rights and equality, didn't come from God. It came from brave individuals who dared to challenge the status quo. Enlightenment thinkers like Spinoza, Voltaire, and Hume weren't looking to divine authority for answers. They pushed for reason, autonomy, and human rights, ideas that frequently clashed with religious teachings. It wasn't the church that first recognized the idea of consent in marriage. That came from secular, feminist movements that had to fight against the notion that wives owed sex to their husbands, a doctrine grounded in centuries of Christian theology.
And therefore, there is no moral responsibility. So there isn't even the possibility of moral duty on his view. So while I can affirm and applaud Dr. Harris's affirmation of the objectivity of moral values and moral duties, at the end of the day, his philosophical worldview just doesn't ground these entities that we both want to affirm. If God exists, then we clearly have a sound foundation for objective moral values and moral duties. But if God does not exist, that is, if atheism is true, then there is no basis for the affirmation of objective moral values, and there is no ground for objective moral duties, because there is no moral lawgiver and there is no freedom of the will. And therefore, it seems to me that atheism is simply bereft of the adequate ontological foundations to establish the moral life.
Dr. Harris now has 12 minutes. Timekeeper, are you ready? Begin.
Well, that was all very interesting. Ask yourselves, what is wrong with spending eternity in hell? Well, I'm told it's rather hot there, for one. Dr. Craig is not offering an alternative view of morality. Okay, the whole point of Christianity, or so it is imagined, is to safeguard the eternal well-being of human souls. Now, happily, there's absolutely no evidence that the Christian hell exists. Okay, and I think we should look at the consequences of believing in this framework, this theistic framework, in this world, and what these moral underpinnings actually would be. All right. 9 million children die every year before they reach the age of 5. Okay, picture an Asian tsunami of the sort we saw in 2004 that killed 250,000 people. One of those every 10 days, killing children only under 5. Okay, it's 24,000 children a day, 1,000 an hour, 17 or so a minute. That means before I can get to the end of this sentence, some few children, very likely, will have died in terror and agony. Think of the parents of these children. Think of the fact that most of these men and women believe in God and are praying at this moment for their children to be spared. And their prayers will not be answered. Okay, but according to Dr. Craig, this is all part of God's plan. Any God who would allow children by the millions to suffer and die in this way, and their parents to grieve in this way, either can do nothing to help them or doesn't care to. He is therefore either impotent or evil. And worse than that, on Dr. Craig's view, most of these people, many of these people certainly, will be going to hell because they're praying to the wrong God. Just think about that. Okay, through no fault of their own, they were born into the wrong culture where they got the wrong theology and they missed the revelation. Okay, there are 1.2 billion people in India at this moment. Most of them are Hindus, most of them therefore polytheists. Okay, in Dr. Craig's universe, no matter how good these people are, they are doomed. If you are praying to the monkey god Hanuman, you are doomed. Okay. You will be tortured in hell for eternity. Now, is there the slightest evidence for this? No. It just says so in Mark 9 and Matthew 13 and Revelation 14. Okay. Perhaps you'll remember from the Lord of the Rings, it says when the elves die, they go to Valinor, but they can be reborn in Middle-earth. I say that just as a point of comparison. Okay. So God created the cultural isolation of the Hindus. Okay. He engineered the circumstance of their deaths in ignorance of revelation. And then he created the penalty for this ignorance, which is an eternity of conscious torment in fire. Okay, on the other hand, on Dr. Craig's account, your run-of-the-mill serial killer in America, okay, who spent his life raping and torturing children, need only come to God, come to Jesus on death row, and after a final meal of fried chicken, he's going to spend an eternity in heaven after death.
Dr. Craig's argument that morality needs a divine lawgiver falls apart on closer inspection. First, the idea that God is the sole source of moral values presents a dangerous contradiction. If morality is only valid because God decrees it, then it becomes arbitrary, and even worse, inconsistent. Consider the millions of children suffering and dying around the world, despite endless prayers. If God is the moral foundation, then we must accept that a being with the power to intervene simply chooses not to. This is not a moral framework. It's a contradiction that undermines the very concept of justice. Second, Dr. Craig's view doesn't stand up to real-world moral concerns. According to his system, a good person born into the wrong culture or religion could be condemned to eternal punishment, while a murderer might be forgiven simply by professing the right beliefs at the end of their life. This logic is a moral disaster. It prioritizes words over actions and belief over empathy, turning justice into a cruel farce. What Dr. Craig's framework really exposes is the incoherence of grounding morality in divine command. The progress humanity has made in building a just moral system wasn't driven by religious doctrine, but by reason, empathy, and shared human experience. So the real question is, can we build a moral system based on reason and humanity, or are we stuck relying on a framework that doesn't make sense? Let us know your thoughts. What's your take on this? Do you think religion is essential for moral values, or can we develop ethics and compassion on our own? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this sparked some ideas, like subscribe and share to keep the discussion alive.